Let's face it, paying to enter expeditions in New World feels a little bit weird. Expeditions are the dungeons of New World, even though it seems like they occasionally get that mixed up.
Yes, absolutely. Each of the dungeon, or each of the expeditions.
So currently, for those of you who don't know, if you are to do one of these expeditions in New World, then you need an orb. Now these expedition orbs are crafted, and quite frankly, they take a long time to either farm the materials. Now some of the materials you actually can't buy and you have to farm them yourself. But crafting one of these expedition orbs actually costs quite a lot of gold and or time. Now in one of the patches, I do think they made them a little bit cheaper. They did something like reduce the cost of the chisel, something like that. However, they're still pretty darn expensive. And this high cost has led to some interesting player behavior that I think sort of only feels like it happens in New World. It means that people are selling spots in the expeditions. So you are paying somebody to just join their group and enter the dungeon. And for a lot of people, that sounds and feels wrong. And it's pretty damn different from most other games that I know of. It's the only one that I can think of that gates its dungeons with this like actual in-game cost. In the past, I can think of in the Burning Crusade where you need to have like a reputation grind, but once you unlocked it, you could then do the dungeon on repeat. Perhaps I'm wrong, perhaps there's other examples out there in some other MMO, but I doubt it's going to be a very popular MMO because I just don't think this really fits in MMOs, if I'm honest. Now let me be a little bit clear here. I have no qualms with people selling the spots in expeditions. I think it's actually the game design that is making that seem very reasonable, because otherwise you're expecting one person to basically fund all of the key and get all of the materials, and then other players in that group get the reward. It's game design, not player behavior issue, I think. So let's talk about the design. Why are Amazon gating the content like this? Well, the answer is pretty simple there. The expedition rewards are pretty damn good. You get a lot of gold, you get some chances at some very good gear, and you get a guaranteed expertise bump. And quite frankly, if you made them free to enter just like that, then what would happen is that the hardcore players would literally just farm them on repeat, basically getting like thousands of gold, because I think each one gives you maybe like 1,000 gold, and maybe a hardcore player would say do it 10 times a day, if not way more than that. So they'd be getting like over 10,000 gold a day just by farming these dungeons. Now my question there is that actually a problem? Now really that's for Amazon to decide, but in general when it comes to other games, it's actually the difficulty of the dungeon itself that is the gate. So basically the difficulty of completing the dungeon, the difficulty of getting the group together, etc. essentially is the thing that enables you to get the good rewards, because you earned it by completing the dungeon. Now New World obviously has that in some degree as well. You still need to get the 5 people together, and the dungeons aren't necessarily a complete cakewalk, but you know, they're still a little bit difficult. And it's actually one of the only things that requires a bit of skill in the game. So New World, whilst it does have that little bit of skill needed to complete the dungeons, it also has this gating up front, which is literally just an in-game cost that stops players from entering. And I just think it feels wrong for an MMO. Like the idea of grinding dungeons is one that sort of dates back literally decades now, and New World takes that away. But there is at least one benefit to the system. Because you have to pay gold normally to get into these dungeons, what's happening is that players simply aren't going to leave as much. They are only going to sign up for your dungeon, and they're going to be really invested in trying to complete it. Yes, occasionally some players are going to leave and some players are going to be like, oh, we wiped, I'm going to bail, whatever. But if you've already paid and you've already like had to upfront that cost, you're already invested a little bit and you're less likely to bail. And if somebody actually does leave, then it's pretty easy to find a replacement pretty damn quick, because somebody's going to be like, oh, I'll get them rewards, please, thank you very much. There is a little bit of a disadvantage as well, is that there is a slight risk that some players will get scammed out of the gold. Maybe you'll pay for a key and they'll just like kick you out, or maybe you'll have a key and you'll invite players and then they'll kick you out and invite the friend. You know, there's all kinds of things that could happen. And I do think that the key is just a little bit off-putting for casuals. Like for a casual player, the keys seem like a lot of gold and it feels like a lot of work for them to create their own. There are some like in-game ways of getting free orbs. There's like, you can get 2 for Genesis and you can get 2 for Lazarus, for example. But in my eyes, it doesn't feel like it's casual friendly content. I don't think casual people are doing them enough. Yes, you can do them. I'm not saying you can't do them, by the way. And maybe the hardcore players are like, oh, I don't want those casuals playing my game anyway, get lost. But even for those hardcore players, it's not really repeatable content, because there's other things like the actual keys can only be crafted once every, I think it's once every week at this point, and there's cooldowns on the materials that are involved and all kinds of stuff. So what's happening is that basically a hardcore player will make their key, they'll sell the spots in their team, and then they'll just buy spots in other keys, basically. Now, overall, it feels to me that Amazon does not like repeatable content that gives you good reward. I don't know why, it just feels like that's what they're against. And quite frankly, it feels a little bit backwards in an MMO. It feels like a philosophy that just does not belong. Like they strongly want to limit and control your progression but unfortunately I think what they're doing is limiting the amount of fun players can have. So like, what is the solution? Like I said it earlier, if you make them free to entry, well, you're going to have essentially two problems. It would create a complete gulf in the economy just in terms of the crafting mats of the orbs, and then it would also cause like economic chaos because players would just farm them repeatedly and they would gain so much gold, so much gear and so much expertise that it would sort of render everything else a little bit pointless. So I don't think making them free to enter is really the simple solution it seems on the surface, because if they did decide to make them free to enter, I sort of feel like they would then have to go in and completely like tone down the rewards. Would they have to do that? No, but they would want to do that. But I think there can be some sort of balance between what we have now and then just making them free to enter with nerf reward. I have in general been against time gating content. Again, I mean, that's a whole different subject, but I sort of feel like time gated content also doesn't necessarily feel super appropriate for an MMO, but I can understand why you would want to do that. And in this instance, I actually think time gating the expeditions would make sense and would be a simple solution to this problem. I would not mind, for example, if you said that you could only complete each expedition once per day, and essentially you put all of the good rewards at the end of the dungeon. Now that already exists a little bit, but I mean like all of the gold, etc. You put it at the end of the dungeon, therefore you complete it, you're done, and you don't lose out. I feel like that this would let casuals play without feeling pressured, and for the hardcore players it probably wouldn't be much change apart from they wouldn't have to fork out the cost of the keys. Doing both the expeditions in a day would take what, maybe like an hour or 2 hours, something like that. I think that would be the simple done solution. However, things are going to get a little bit more complicated with the introduction of the expedition mutators that sounds like it's coming out in January. Now for those of you who don't know, this is essentially going to be something akin to Mythic Plus from World of Warcraft. There's going to be 10 different difficulty levels and you're going to have to like work your way up basically. Now we don't fully know how the mutators are going to fit into this whole scheme, like how much are the keys going to cost, what's the frequency, etc. And they actually specifically called out that they would be okay with people running them repeatedly in the same day. Now one thing they did say is that when you basically get a key for one of these, it sounds like it's going to be generic. So let's say you have a level 2 key, well then you can do level 2 Genesis and you can do level 2 Lazarus. It doesn't sound like it's going to be a specific expedition key, if that makes sense. So people are taking from that these keys are going to be sort of relatively cheaper to do because it's like you get them once and you can use them either. We don't actually know if the keys are going to get consumed. We don't really know enough about it at the moment. We can expect more information on that, I think possibly in the coming days. Now this does beg the question, if we have essentially hard mode dungeons, what happens to the original expeditions? It sort of sounds like the perfect opportunity for Amazon to say, okay, well now we're making a hard mode that we're going to just put behind the difficulty. Well, these original dungeons now, well, we can maybe make them free to enter. However, I'm not really sure that Amazon either want to do that or are going to do that because of a few reasons. One of them is simply I'm not sure Amazon like the idea. One theory that I saw is that basically the expedition mutators could, instead of dropping fresh gear, what they may actually do is drop something that upgrades your gear that you get from the expeditions. We've seen that gear score 620 items are coming, and they essentially confirmed that in the live chat that this is going to be tied to the expedition mutators. And actually, if you look in game and then you like click on one of your items, you can now see an option to upgrade that item using something called umbral shards and crystals. It's very possible that what they're going to do is put these in the expedition mutators and you then just upgrade your old gear rather than giving you fresh, better gear. This would mean that you still need to run the old dungeons and they would still keep the cost on the old dungeons. But then would it be okay if you can essentially do the expeditions on repeat in this sort of like mutator form, but the actual vanilla expeditions, if you will, are still locked behind a key? Yeah, maybe, because you then have repeatable content that all players can do. It would still feel a little bit odd and it would feel pretty different from most other games, as I said, but I think it would sort of work. It doesn't sound awful, so we'll have to wait and see if that's what happens with the mutators. Overall, I think just having these like core pillar of gameplay, these dungeons, expeditions, whatever you want to call them, being locked behind these keys so that you can't just enter them at like will, it just feels weird and it feels like it only happens in New World. There's probably some niche game, by the way, that I've never heard of that does something similar, but I mean, who cares? If you like this video, then do press like. If you're not subscribed to the channel and interested in New Worlds and MMOs and stuff like that, then please subscribe. Have a most beautiful day. Goodbye.